And it's a great pleasure to welcome the TVP World, Kersti Kaljulaid, former president of Estonia. Madam President, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, former Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas is to become the EU foreign policy chief. I'd like to just ask you about this to start off. How do you think this will affect diplomacy from the European Union's perspective?
Well, I am quite sure that it will not particularly affect the diplomacy from the EU's perspective, because, of course, Kaja is very competent to take care of all the worries of all the member states in whichever corner of Europe they happen to be. I've understood that some people have been worrying whether Kaja will pay necessary attention to the questions of Africa, etc. But I am quite sure that she is fully competent, extremely enthusiastic, and really, really good in international debates, as we have all seen in the last years.
Well, it's great to have a representative from our region as the chief of diplomacy. I think you'd agree.
Not only, we also have the chief of defense, a new territory for the Commission, and the fact that we even have somebody who is responsible for defense issues is extremely important as well. So indeed, we can be very happy and very grateful to Ursula von der Leyen.
Now, Mark Rutte is the new NATO Secretary General. What challenges do you think he faces both in our region and, of course, in dealing with Ukraine?
Well, the challenge is common. We need to spend more on our defense and on helping Ukraine. And as Estonian Ministry of Defense has calculated, annually we have spent only 0.1% of our collective GDPs to support and help Ukraine. Nobody can win a war on peanuts. So we absolutely need to up our support. And this is extremely important job. There is absolutely no other more important task for Mark Rutte. Of course, he himself will face considerable difficulties convincing member states to put up their defense spending, because during his premiership, the 2% level was never achieved. So if you haven't practiced what you now need to preach, this is technically a big problem, but overall I'm quite sure that his skills of negotiation will carry him through also this difficult task.
Now, when we consider potential Russian aggression against a NATO member state, Estonia is one of the first that comes to mind. Are you confident now that due to the forward deployment of a certain amount of troops here in Poland, in the Baltics as well, that actually an attack could be held off long enough for NATO to properly respond to any aggression from the Russian side?
Well, I'm pretty happy about NATO's new strategy, which also because we have been sadly informed by the practices of Russian army in Ukraine, killing, maiming, raping, kidnapping people. Now the plan is that no boots from the attacking army will get to any NATO member states' ground. And this is where we together are spending here at the borders, you, us, quite considerable amounts of our GDP. We plan it to go to 3.5%, and Poland as well is extremely high. So we are clearly doing everything we can ourselves. But of course, we know also that NATO's planning has got better so that we could really feel protected and defended. On the other hand, I would like to take the issue with your conviction, apparently, that Estonia is the most natural place to be afraid and worried. If we look at the current state of play, then Russia is trying intimidation tactics. I mean, poisoning people in UK. There was a military base evacuated in Germany because there were some risks which made people to be concerned about the safety of that base. So we can see that in this hybrid world where we are living, all and out attack is not the only thing which we need to look out for. And these different hybrid issues notably rise more west. And I hope this helps also to understand our Western partners that there is no such thing like forefront nation in the modern day military discussion anymore. So we are all, the whole free world, particularly NATO in Europe, we are collectively at risk, collectively making sure that this risk will not realize. And I think we are doing pretty good.
Now, Estonia has a large Russian minority. Are there fears that this could be used somehow against Estonia in the same way that Vladimir Putin was trying to claim that he was entering Ukraine just to protect the Russian minority or Russian speakers?
Well, as we all know, there was absolutely no truth in his claim that any Russian in Ukraine needed to be defended. So in this sense, we all know that this is a ruse, it's a cover, it was not the real reason. And no Ukrainian Russian-speaking person, sent out a plea to please come and help us living here in Ukraine and suffering from a very difficult situation. As we well know, then both Russian language was well spoken in Ukraine and is still there. But Russian-speaking people in Ukraine are now fighting against aggression because they want to be part of the free world. Same applies to those people here in Estonia whose first foreign language is Russia. I think they are all very much torn by the fact that the country which they respect as their cultural fatherland is doing horrible things because they know it is doing horrible things. And there are very few people here in Estonia who the Russians themselves call ždune, or people who are waiting. And most of our Russian-speaking minority definitely is for free world. Another thing, they are not all Russian. As you well know, in Soviet Union, people were circulated from one part of the Union to the other to make sure that everybody becomes Sovietsky человек, Soviet person, and nationalities would not matter anymore. So as soon as things started to go wrong in Ukraine, 1/3 of our Russian speakers stood up and said, we're not Russians, we're Ukrainians actually. So when in Belarus we had people trying to set more democracy into that country's system, another 1/3 got up and said, I have my roots in Belarus. I do not support what is going on right now in that country. So in addition, these people are not Russians. They are just Russian-speaking minority. Of course, our school system is gradually turning also only into Estonian language. So this is the lingua franca in this country. But also, if our children, all nationalities, study together, then their value base is also certainly the same.
I'd like to ask you about the U.S. elections and former President Donald Trump potentially coming back. He says he has a plan to end the war in Ukraine. He can do so overnight. But many people are talking about this concept of Ukraine giving up land for neutrality to have some kind of peace with Russia and Vladimir Putin. I'd like to just get your thoughts on that. Is this something that would be remotely acceptable, or would this be indeed a big danger to the rest of us here on the eastern flank?
Having worked several years, because my presidency coincided with President Trump's presidency, I noticed one thing. He's very compassionate about wars and illegal arms, like chemical arms, for example, harming people in faraway places. And he might react actually quite strongly, thinking of Syria, for example. So first and foremost, I absolutely do not think that it is a done deal that, Trump will overlook Ukraine's needs and try to settle a deal. He was pretty strong in Eastern Europe in his first term. He was himself in the region. Vice President Pence visited. We had visits to the White House from the Baltic states. So really good contacts. So he knows this region. And I'm quite convinced that it is possible to do, as Mike Pompeo also in Kiev in Yes conference 2 weeks ago said, to appeal to the classic Republican foreign policy.
Now, strengthening regional security in the context of Putin's imperial ambitions here on the eastern flank, of course, of NATO, do you think that we have pretty much taken care of the direct threats that Russia poses at this point, and that it would that we're actually in a safe position?
Interestingly, I think we are in a safer position than when this aggression started, because then it was pretty tough sometimes to convince not necessarily politicians, but also some politicians, but definitely it was tough to convince populations of the Western European nations about what kind of a risk we are facing, all of us in Europe. Now it is considerably easier, and we know that human beings are compassionate and they actually do support. If you look at the polls and surveys in Western European countries, they actually do support the Ukraine's place among free world nations, and therefore politicians have an easier job to convince everybody to continue our strong support.
Madam President, thank you very much for joining us today on TVP World. We appreciate your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.